So welcome back to Gathering Folds. My name is Madonna Yoder, and today we're doing a tutorial on a different symmetry extension than normal on the hex tri rom tri tiling. And I'll get into what all of that means, but let's start by diving in and I'll show with what we're making how these different symmetry considerations are coming into play with the particular pattern that we're folding today, which is named Party Poppers, and I'll be using a 48 fold grid, so 48 divisions from top to bottom, and that's in all three directions on a hexagon. And we're going to start by putting a closed hexagon twist in the center. So I have a mountain fold running out to the right hand side corner, and I'm going to put a valley fold one spacing above. Notice if I'm using the corners as a reference for this, I don't really need to know where the center of the paper is, but if you happen to be using a triangle grid based on a square or a rectangle to fold this, then you're going to want to have your mountain folds running straight in to the center. Welcome early, glad you could join me today. And I'm going to go ahead and do 6 pleats all in the same way, with the mountain fold going out to the corner and the valley one space away. Go ahead and zoom in so we can see what's going on there in the center. And you'll notice by the time I hit this third pleat, I'm already paying more attention to the center than I am to the corner of the paper. And that's because once I have 2 pleats in place, those mountain folds are pointing directly into the center, which is my reference for finding the remaining pleats. We only really use this trick of looking at where the pleat hits the edge of the paper for the first twist. So it's a good habit to get into to see how the pleats are interacting with each other and not just with the edge of the paper. So this is a right-handed closed hexagon twist. Right-handed because when I have my thumb up with my right hand and curl my fingers around, I'm not catching my fingers on any of the pleats like I would with my left hand. And I'm going to take this twist and tap it on the top and grab it around the sides and do a sharp twist around. You can also rotate the base of the paper to get a nice sharp twist. It doesn't always fold down that cleanly, and you may need to fold up and double check that your valley folds are on grid lines to get things to lay down cleanly. We're not creating any new folds in this step, just rotating the paper so that this hexagon goes down flat. Next up, we're going to put in closed triangle twists, and we're going to do this at tube pleat spacing. So I call this tube pleat spacing because when you have the valley one space from the folded mountain and the next mountain one space further, I'll always use dashed blue for valley and red for mountain. With those folded up and extended down to the edge, notice I did not extend past the pleat that we're working on. Those are going to create a little tube. And this is going to be a closed triangle twist, which means that the third direction of mountain fold, beside the existing folded mountain and this new mountain of the tube pleat, that third direction is going to come out exactly at the grid intersection where the first two met up. And we can also run that pleat out to the edge of the paper. One thing you might notice is that this triangle twist is left-handed. So in this pattern, the hexagons are all going to be right-handed, the triangles are all going to be left-handed, and we'll have rhombus twists as well, which will also be right-handed. From here, I'm going to continue up counterclockwise, and this makes it slightly harder to see where the spacing for our tube pleat is. But another way that we can recognize these folds is by saying, okay, the valley is one space out from under the hexagon, and the mountain is one space further. This is different than what you'll see in the crease pattern because that pleat actually goes 2 spaces until it connects to the hexagon. So from here, I'm going to create a pleat overlap down below and set up my triangle twist on the top pleat. And if you want slower details of all of these steps, I do have lots of tutorials in the Advent of Tess series that go into how to fold a pattern that has a hexagon, then a triangle, then a rhombus. With the 48 fold grid today, I'm going to need to go a little bit faster than normal through the center so we can focus more on the symmetry points further out. And I'll squash my closed triangle twist, and I have this pleat overlap that I'm going to go ahead and resolve right away. Now, if we were thinking, okay, let's do a hexagons and triangles and that's it pattern, then this would be whatever hexagon we choose. But in this context, we're going to do an open rhombus twist. So what that means, and I'll go ahead and draw it on for the first one, and I can see that this needs to be here because I've folded so many of these. It's not necessarily something that I would expect someone to recognize right away on the first attempt. We're going to have our anvil shape for our open rhombus lining up so the key things here is the mountain fold coming from, I'm going to go ahead and label them 2 and 1. The mountain fold coming from triangle 2 jumps over 1 grid spacing, and it has to jump away from the valley of the fold. So it's jumping away from the valley, and then the valley of that parallel pleat is on the far side. And in the case of the pleat coming from triangle 1, our mountain fold is jumping 2 spaces. So we've got that second space in there, and likewise it's jumping away from the valley that's over here, and then the valley fold of this new pleat is on the far side. And you might be thinking, well, how do I know which one needs to jump 1 and which one needs to jump 2? This is not an arbitrary decision. This is actually required in order to get the rhombus twist to squash flat. But for now, we'll just have this recognition, and well, you can go and look at all of my videos that include open rhombus twists, and I'll talk some more about that twist in particular. But for today's purposes, we're going to move a little bit further. There's always more to dig into with these origami tessellations. So today, we're really focusing on the symmetries of the pattern. And if we were in the typical archetype, so now I'm repeating the steps I used to get twist 2, to get triangle 3. So setting up the tube pleat, setting up a closed triangle, and then at the pleat overlap, putting in a open rhombus twist. So another way to look at this, now that we have another setup here, is that from this triangle that we folded most recently, the pleat that's going through on top, we're going to jump over 1 spacing. And from the pleat that's folded from triangle 2, we're going to jump over 2 spacings. And it just so happens that when you do that, you also get these little triangles sticking out. It's almost like you took a central diamond of the closed rhombus and then stuck this parallelogram in the middle of it. And we'll get to the closed rhombus in just a moment. And so I'm going to be repeating these steps all the way around. So I'm going to rotate to my next pleat coming from the hexagon and set up the new triangle twist, which causes a pleat overlap with triangle 3. And then open up that overlap to put in the new open rhombus twist. And as always, these tutorials are recorded, so you can go back when you're folding it for yourself and see, how did I do that on number 1? How did I do that on number 2? And it's the same exact steps each time, of course, until we get to the very final one, which will have a slightly different ordering of pleats. But it's setting up the same shapes all the way around our central hexagon. So in the hex tri rom tri tiling that we're working in, and it's named that because we go hex tri rom tri in a loop, the rhombi are typically all in positions of twofold rotational symmetry. And we're going to start this pattern with what looks like that exact same rule. And then we're going to change. And these open rhombi are actually going to be in asymmetric positions. And we're going to see how that affects the pattern as a whole. So this is a symmetry style that I used first in the pattern Showcase and also in, I keep forgetting if it was Motes or another one that was also in the Advent of Tess ebook from this last year. But there's 2 patterns in the symmetry style in the Advent of Tess ebook for 2024. And I figured it's a good time to, actually, before I do things that I haven't done previous repeats of, I should explain. So this pleat overlap is in the opposite order. The pleat from triangle 1 went through first, and then this would be triangle 6. That pleat went through second. So I have to open up all the way. So I'm pushing from behind to get that corner to pop out. And then I can set up my open rhombus twist as usual. You might notice that my paper gives a very satisfying crinkle sound when you run a pleat out to the edge. And that's because it's a paper called Skytone, which is my favorite paper for folding tessellations, not just because of the crinkly noises, although that helps, but it's because of what the crinkly noise means, which is that the paper is very crisp and it only wants to fold on the grid lines. Very convenient when you're setting up all kinds of shenanigans on top of it. So back to what I was saying about the symmetries. Usually in this tiling, the choices would all be done now. And you would just say, okay, this is the spacing between my rhombus and triangle off the pointy corners. And this is the spacing between my rhombus and triangle off the fat corners. And this is like how the triangles feed back into the hexagon. And that would be all the decisions. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. It's going to look the same at the start, but what's going to happen is we're going to have these loops where instead of hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle, it's alternating rhombus, triangle, third rhombus, third triangle. And we're going to make a different choice for that rhombus that's going to shift the entire pattern. So we're actually going to start as if we were in the basic symmetry, and the triangles are going to relate to these rhombi exactly the same way they did on the inside edge. So namely, we have tube pleat spacing for the triangle off of the pleat from the fat corner. And so I'm going to have a valley fold one space away from this folded mountain, mountain fold one spacing further. Another way to read that is to say, I need to go 2 spaces from the fat corner to reach the corner of the triangle. And that means 2 spaces to reach the valley fold. And the reason why of these 2 parallel plates I'm picking this one is because it's layered on top, and that tends to give better results in general for tessellation folding, not just in this tiling, although I will say it's more of a try this first and see what happens kind of deal. So next up, I want to find the triangle up here, and that triangle has no space from the corner to the corner of the rhombus to the corner of the triangle, so there's going to be no space from that corner to the valley fold of the triangle twist. And we'll have our mountain coming down. And what I'm going to do is, instead of creating a pleat overlap here, I'm going to put in a 3-way intersection of mountain folds, because what I can see in the crease pattern is that our next twist is going to be on the same side. So I may as well just make it nice and easy to set up. And then I'm going to squash this triangle. And now what does come next? If I was doing the basic symmetry, this would be another open rhombus. But because I'm doing an extended symmetry pattern, I'm actually going to make this a closed rhombus. This is why I needed so much grid. So I found the central diamond of my closed rhombus twist right in that corner of the 3-way intersection of mountains that I'd set up in the previous step. And that is how I'm going to squash this position. And I'm going to actually go ahead and fill in this central diamond to mark that this is a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry in the whole pattern. So not these rhombi, just this one. And that means that if I go to the next set of parallel plates, I'm going to choose to start working here. My next triangle is right at the corner of this closed rhombus. So set up that new triangle, and this pleat is headed through a bunch of other plates, causing pleat overlaps out to the edge of the paper. and I can squash my new twist. What comes next? Well, we can look at our triangles in the center and gather a rule that will apply to all the triangles in this tiling, which is that one pleat goes to a hexagon, one pleat goes to a skinny corner of a rhombus, and one pleat goes to a fat corner of a rhombus. Again, that will be true for all triangles in this pattern, regardless of which rhombus they go to, which hexagon they go to. One pleat is going to go to a hexagon, one pleat's going to the skinny corner of a rhombus, one pleat is going to the fat corner of a rhombus. And I kind of gave it away there, but this is the pleat going to a hexagon. And in this particular pattern, that hexagon is going to be a closed hexagon on the back. So I'm going to grab my pleat overlap. So notice I grabbed this area that I had identified a hexagon goes to, grabbed it from both sides of the paper, flipped over, and now I'm opening up that overlap and I'm going to put in a closed hexagon twist. Now I notice when I put in this closed hexagon twist that if I just ran this through, I would end up folding through the corner of this rhombus down here. So instead of folding it all the way through, I'm going to do a triangle wrap with the first pleat that I encounter. And now that pleat is headed safely out to the edge of the paper. And I can go ahead and set up my remaining pleats. So this is another closed hexagon like we saw in the center, but it's the opposite side of the paper, so it kind of counts as a different hexagon. And like we saw in the center, we're going to bop it, grab it, give it a sharp twist, and then smooth it out once it's down, and flip back to the, let's call it A side of the paper. So we've got this triangle that had been set up, and how do we know that this is really the triangle that we want to fold? Thanks, Sushant. Well, one of the things we can see is that it's got this 2 spaces to the fat corner of the rhombus, and that is the same reference that we used down here. So we can go ahead and fold that triangle. Now we have a pleat overlap up here. We're going to follow the same rules that we used for this triangle and this rhombus to take care of this triangle and then this rhombus down below. Namely that, and I need to untangle some stuff down here to get that pleat from a hexagon to be happy again. But namely, the triangle on this side of this open rhombus is the same spacing as the triangle on the other side. And you can think of that as the corner of the triangle is right at the corner of the rhombus, or you can think the center of the triangle is one spacing away from the corner of the rhombus. Both of those give the same results. And I set up the 3-way intersection down here for the new rhombus twist. And we'll see our central diamond there. And I'll go ahead and fill that in, because all of my closed rhombi are going to be positions of 2-fold rotational symmetry. So then what has to be down here? If this is a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry and the pleat parallel to this one goes to a triangle on the same side as the rhombus, then this one also has to go to a triangle on the same side as the rhombus. And the way the pleats come together dictate where exactly that needs to be. And squash, and squash. And so up to this point, you might be looking at this and saying, wow, this seems pretty scattered. I do this triangle, then this triangle, then this rhombus, then this triangle, then that hexagon, and this triangle, and then triangle, rhombus, triangle. This seems all over the place. But there is a method to the madness. What we've done is add 2 triangles for a new rhombus, 2 triangles for a new hexagon, 2 triangles for a new rhombus. Next up is 2 triangles for a new hexagon. Yeah, that's cool that you have a teacher who looks like me. Very neat. So in setting up the 2 triangles for the next hexagon, I need to be aware of the symmetry around the rhombus, and to a lesser degree, the symmetry around the hexagon. And what's going on with the hexagon is we actually have threefold rotational symmetry. So I'm marking 3 lines that are short distances to triangles, and then the alternating lines are long distances to triangles. So we're going to have one triangle set up here, and if we want to emphasize that this is, 2 triangles being set up to place the new hexagon, we can let this triangle lay down flat and go ahead and find the next triangle also. Notice I'm making it so that the pleat can feed down into where we're putting the hexagon while I set up this 3-way intersection that will become the triangle. Notice the 2 grid spacings to the fat corner of the rhombus. So now I have 3 pleats from triangles feeding into this hexagon. I can go ahead and flip the paper over. And find that new closed hexagon twist and take it, tap the top and grab it and give it a sharp twist to squash all the way. And now when I flip back over, I can squash those 2 triangle twists that I set up to find my hexagon. And I'll go ahead and mark the short pleats headed to triangles so we can see those symmetry markings as we're going around. And actually on that note, I may as well mark the 6 pleats of our central hexagon for symmetry. If I was thinking ahead, I would have done all the symmetry points in blue to not interfere with the other markings that we have, but oh well. So now I want to add in 2 new triangles and the next rhombus. And I'm going to start up here because that's more or less the easiest reference to find. And I'm opening this up to find the triangle twist. And I can go ahead and set these up as triangle twists that are ready to squash instead of 3-way intersections, because my closed rhombus is on the same side of the paper and everything is far enough apart that I am not interfering with one twist by keeping another ready to squash. And I can go ahead and do all 3 of those. And now we're suddenly moving a lot faster around the paper. So next up, we're going to do 2 triangles that feed into the hexagon in a position of 3-fold symmetry. And we know that this triangle goes here because it's the opposite side of our closed rhombus, our position of 2-fold symmetry. And we know that this triangle up here has the 2 spaces from the fat corner of the rhombus to get to the corner, aka the valley fold of the triangle, because that's the rule that we've been following so far. And this is a very convenient pattern for teaching this because we do have those nice and easy rules of we actually do see the same thing on opposite sides of the open rhombus. It's just not a position of symmetry because the closed rhombus supersedes that. And then flipping over, we can add in the remaining pleats of our closed hexagon. And grab it, sharp twist. That one I did a little bit slower and it came out a little bit more crumpled, but smoothed out quite easily. And flipping over, we can squash our triangles one at a time and continue with our new 2 triangles and a hexagon, or sorry, a rhombus that we need next. I'm just marking those pleats that are shorter distances to get to the triangles from these hexagons. One of the things that I'm noticing is that whenever we have this situation, we have the valley fold going directly from the corner of the rhombus to the corner of this triangle. That's just a convenient thing to notice as you're folding. And one additional thing that I want to point out with our twists here, because it's not random that we have a open rhombus in the asymmetric position transitioning to a closed rhombus in the symmetric position, paired with the closed hexagon in the central position going to the closed hexagon on the opposite side in the 3-fold position. Both of those transitions are basically one shift to the left, but left is a very relative arrangement, one shift towards closed front, towards open back, actually, because as you shift your pleats to go from open front, closed front, shift some more, you eventually get to closed back. And so the way that this structure works is if you have a rhombus that you are shifting in one particular direction and you shift your hexagons that same direction, the pattern will work out. And you can have your triangles that treat the asymmetric rhombus like it's a position of 2-fold symmetry, but just locally, and then have your second rhombus in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry, your second hexagon in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. This is something that's determined by the way the pleats are shifting in order to produce this rhombus and this hexagon that mandates functionally that they are the new positions of symmetry. And if you want to explore that topic more, go ahead and check out my videos on number lines of twists and extended symmetry patterns in various tilings. And that has a much more thorough explanation of the theory behind these shifts in pleats and changing one twist into another. That in order to get through the tutorial, I don't really have time to go into all of the details right here. So I just put in the 2 triangles that lead to the hexagon. And in this ring around the center, we're going back and forth. 2 triangles that lead into the hexagon, then 2 triangles that lead into the closed rhombus. So now 2 triangles that lead into the closed rhombus. And again, we're able to go ahead and set up these 2 triangles ready to be squashed, going into the rhombus, while for the hexagon, we are laying those triangles down as 3-way intersections and squashing them after the hexagon has been squashed, because the rhombus is on the same side as the triangles and the hexagon is on the opposite side. So when you are preparing triangles to feed into a twist on the opposite side, whether that's a hexagon or a rhombus, then you want to set up the triangles so that they can lay flat immediately without being squashed. Flip over and finish the twist that's on the other side, and then come back and squash the triangles. So on some level, this pattern is extremely similar to dancing ribbons, which actually is a pattern that I have an Advent of Test tutorial for the very center. And that one has the closed hexagon on one side and the closed triangle and closed rhombus on the opposite side. But that's always at this denser spacing. And here the little ribbon chunk is spaced further away from the hexagon than it would be in the dancing ribbons pattern. So there's a lot of overlap. There's also some differences. Here we're coming around to the last repeat. I'm going to start out the same way of finding my 2 triangles that go around my rhombus, my closed rhombus, and squash all 3 of those twists. And now I'm going to find my new triangles feeding into the hexagon. And I have a slightly different layout than before because I already have 2 of them. Before I just had 1. And so I'll find this one, and then I have a choice here. I can either go ahead and find the rest of the pleats of the hexagon and use that to do a triangle wrap while I'm on the other side. Or I can say, well, opening this up here, all of my valley folds are feeding into corners of this little grid hexagon. And that's the pattern that I want to continue. And I can go ahead and find this new triangle twist. I can also find it by saying, well, this triangle is on the opposite side of the position of two-fold rotational symmetry, and on the other side, that was 1, 2, 3 spaces to the valley fold, therefore 1, 2, 3 spaces to the valley fold going in there. And then I'll flip over and find my remaining pleats, making sure I don't undo any of these triangles that I already set up. And bop it, grab it, twist it around, and squash. Flipping back, I'll squash these two triangles, and that gets me all the way around the center. Go ahead and fill in my symmetry positions. And now we have time for one more ring. Well, really, we have grid for one more ring around the center. And another feature of this tiling, so we always get to these places where we have true tiling breaks, where all of the twists that have been folded have been completely folded. There's nothing left, like say a rhombus set up as a three-way intersection of mountain folds. And we don't have any pleat overlaps. So I'll just zoom out a little so you can see the whole thing. So now I've got the same thing all the way around the center. I've got a set of parallel pleats, and in this tiling, we alternate between rings that have hexagons and rings that do not have hexagons, rings that have hexagons, and now this next ring will not have hexagons. It'll only have rhombi and triangles. So I've got my set of parallel pleats. It's been working pretty well to go counterclockwise. So I'm going to start from the bottom one, and I notice that this is my three-fold hexagon, and this pleat I need to go further. I need to go 2 spaces to get to the valley fold of this triangle. And so I'll set up that new triangle twist and squash, and I need to see, okay, what goes in that position. So I can go around this hexagon and say, okay, if I am coming from a short triangle, what comes next? And it's going to be this open rhombus twist. So I can open up that overlap, and I could have said earlier, like, what is the rhombus going to be? I know there's going to be a rhombus, and set up the rhombus before I even squashed this triangle, and then that overlap would have been easier to open. But I didn't, and that's okay. And squash this rhombus. Now I have a question about what is going to be around this big triangular open space. How many of one rhombus and how many of the other? Well, I can see that this position of twofold rotational symmetry, the closed rhombus, is connected to both of these triangles, meta triangles, and we have 2 open rhombi and 1 closed rhombi in each of these triangle situations. So that's what I'm going to have here too. And I'll start by opening the pleat overlap and saying, where does the triangle need to go on this pleat from the fat corner of the open rhombus? And from the fat corner of the open rhombus, I have 2 grid spacings to get to the valley, and then 1 more grid spacing to get to the mountain. And I can choose to do this a variety of ways. For this first one, I'm going to show the minimum amount set up at each stage. So I can say, well, this pleat is going to another twist on the same side of the paper. I'm going to lay that down as a three-way intersection and squash my triangle twist. Notice I'm tucking this three-way intersection under the triangle. I could also try and hold it over the triangle. Either way, I just want to be careful to get clean corners as I'm squashing this triangle twist. Next up, I know that this three-way intersection has to go into an open rhombus twist because in these loops of 6 twists that are distinct from the hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle loop. So those are the only 2 loops we have: hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle, and alternating 3 triangles and 3 rhombi. So we're in an alternating 3 triangles and 3 rhombi. We just happen to have a different rhombus for one of them. We're going to have our open rhombus, and that's going to feed up into another pleat, which we will set up a 3-way intersection and lay down flat, because that's going to be the closed triangle off the far side. And squash. And then we can squash that triangle twist also. So what we just did is we found, let's see, we already had that triangle. We did 1 triangle and got this rhombus, then 2 more triangles for that rhombus. And now we're moving into this set of parallel pleats. We're going to have another triangle like we had set up before, with the valley 2 spaces out from the center of the closed hexagon on the back. And for this one, we actually have pleat overlaps on both sides. So why did I start with the triangle and not with whatever goes on this pleat? Partly it's because we'd already seen what the triangle does, and partly it's because if you have 2 pleats going into a rhombus, you've fully determined everything about it. And the thing to recognize about this rhombus is that as we go around our position of threefold symmetry, we hit closed, open, closed, open. This has got to be a closed and then an open rhombus. So we're putting a closed rhombus twist here. And we have just enough grid to do that with 48 grid divisions. And I'll go ahead and color in my symmetry position there. And then we have the open rhombus. So what just happened? We put in 1 triangle and got 2 rhombi out instead of 2 triangles for 1 rhombus. So this rule that we had in the previous ring around the center of 2 triangles for each rhombus or 2 triangles for each hexagon doesn't quite hold in this next ring where there's only rhombi and triangles. But that's okay. We can still go around and fold all the things. We can just say, hey, there's a pleat overlap. I need to open that up. And I'm going to end up with a triangle down here, going into an open rhombus. And why is it an open rhombus? It's completing a group of 3 that already has a closed rhombus. Then that's going to feed into another closed triangle up here. And I want to squash my rhombus first this time, trying to keep this triangle flap out of the way, and then my 2 triangles. So here we do have 2 triangles for a new rhombus. And then we're getting back into the next set of parallel pleats. This ring around the center goes pretty fast because there's no hexagons. And this time I'm going to set up my triangle that I'm going to want to squash as a 3-way intersection. Just go ahead and put that closed rhombus that we saw before in there. And then squash the triangle. Go ahead and color that. And at the pleat overlap, I need to pop that out the whole way to find my new open rhombus. So if I had not changed what rhombus I was using for the second choice of rhombus, I would have had the same hexagon as the center here, and I would be finishing up a set of rhombi around a copy of the center. But because I changed that rhombus, this is not a copy of the center, and I have these alternating closed open, closed open, closed open rhombi, or choice 1, choice 2, choice 1, choice 2 rhombi around the second hexagon. So I'm going to go ahead and fold a little bit faster now so we can see what this whole thing looks like in the end. We've seen 2 sets of parallel plates that are getting turned into new folds, new twists. And we're really just working our way across the set of parallel plates. I've got my hexagon in the position of 3-fold rotational symmetry, which is telling me how far out to put this new triangle. And I'm using that triangle to tell me how to feed into my closed rhombus, or my rhombus in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry would be the more general way to formulate it. Squashing the triangle, resolving the pleat overlap with an open rhombus, which was my first choice of rhombus. And then taking that next pleat overlap and resolving it with a triangle using the spacing off of the fat corner of the open rhombus, which is consistent everywhere. And then that feeds into an open rhombus and goes up into a 3-way intersection of mountain folds to form the next closed triangle. And then I can squash all 3 of those twists, and I'm on to the next repeat, where I again set up the triangle at the far spacing from the hexagon in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry, then the rhombus that's a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry, squash the triangle, resolve the pleat overlap with the asymmetric rhombus, not asymmetric as in the twist itself is asymmetric, but asymmetric in the global pattern. I'll actually take a moment here to fill in my symmetry positions. And then resolve the pleat overlap. You'll notice there's a lot of, I see a pleat overlap. Let's do something about that. And next set of parallel pleats, again with my triangle, which is further away from the position of threefold symmetry, and the closed rhombus, which is my position of twofold rotational symmetry. And squash the triangle, resolve the overlap with an open rhombus. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there's only one way to set up the open rhombus from these two pleats coming in. You can't do the spacing the opposite way and expect the twist to squash flat. And we've got a pleat overlap that becomes a triangle and another open rhombus, which feeds into another triangle. And squash all of the above. And here we have one final pleat overlap that is going to become the closed rhombus that basically seals the loop all the way around. And we're back to where we started. So that is Party Poppers, a particular pattern that uses this extended symmetry to create cool designs. And these designs repeat forever. Like we would have the next repeat of the very center out here. And I can say that very authoritatively because I can read off of these twists. Like there's a position of threefold symmetry, twofold symmetry, threefold symmetry. The twofold symmetry has positions of sixfold symmetry on opposite sides and evenly spaced. So that is very much a known quantity. And actually I can find it here in the paper by saying, okay, these are my next triangle twists, and therefore my next hexagon, it's a copy of the center, goes right there. So that's 48 grid divisions, really 24 from corner to corner, to get to the next repeat. And then Chris, let's see the backlighting like you suggested. And I mean, there's a reason why 48 grid spacings fits well for this. I designed the pattern to teach in this tutorial and chose the number of divisions based on the crease pattern. So there's a lot of synchronicity, shall we say, that comes with that set of choices. But yeah, we've got this kind of floral motif in the center, and then it's kind of in a hexagonal cage. I'll make sure to post a fully backlit photo on my Instagram stories in a bit. So yeah, that is how these patterns work. The main considerations for folding is you're going to have rings around the center that alternate between including and excluding hexagons. And in the rings around the center that include hexagons, so like the next ring, if you are folding this on 64 divisions, we'll have hexagons again. And that is going to have 2 new triangles for each new hexagon, 2 new triangles for each new rhombus. And that is how this pattern would go. I can go ahead and say also, and I think I am correct in saying this, that the next ring around the center would just have open rhombi, and these and the hexagons would be one on this side, then one on the other side, then one on this side, and one on the other side. But that's maybe stretching a little further than I absolutely know for certain. It's more of go around and see what's coming up. But I'm pretty sure that that next stripe of pattern is going to look a lot, well, going to look a lot like this. So that's all for this pattern. It's named Party Poppers. I hope you enjoy. Happy folding, and see you next time.